The sound of the wind cutting through the tall, rust-colored grass surrounding the Carter farmhouse was the only constant in Eli's world. It whispered through the cracked walls, around the warped window frames, and under the door that never fully closed anymore. The silence inside was heavier than the wind outside, dense and inescapable. Eli Carter, only 19 years old, carried a weight no one else in his family had been willing to shoulder. And that weight had a name, Jonah. 3 years earlier, everything changed on a cold October night. Jonah had been driving home from college when his car was found flipped in a ditch off a gravel road. The doctors said it was a miracle he was alive at all. But alive didn't mean much when it came with words like traumatic brain injury, vegetative state, and no expected recovery. They explained it clinically, cleanly. He wouldn't walk, speak, or respond. They said it as if it were fact, as if it were final. Eli had stared at Jonah through the hospital glass that first week, searching for any sign that his brother was still in there. But all he saw was stillness. Not death, not life, just something in between. He wasn't ready to lose him. Not like that. Their father lasted 2 months. His excuse was work, but Eli knew he never once looked Jonah in the eyes after the diagnosis. Their mother followed 6 weeks later. She cried when she left, but her tears dried quickly once she settled in Arizona with her new partner. The sisters, Maggie and Leah, had their own lives, their own excuses. "We can't put everything on hold," Maggie said over the phone. Leah didn't even call. So Eli stayed. The farmhouse, once lively and warm, became a place of shadows and routine. Mornings began with soft sponge baths and spoon-fed oatmeal. Days were filled with repositioning Jonah, cleaning him, stretching his arms and legs to prevent stiffness. Nights were long and quiet, with Eli sleeping in a cot beside Jonah's bed, waking every few hours to check on him. He stopped going to community college, stopped seeing friends, stopped hoping for anything more than another day of stillness, another night without Jonah choking on his own breath. But no matter how broken his brother looked, his eyes half closed, mouth slightly agape, body limp, Eli refused to believe he was truly gone. He talked to Jonah every day, told him about the news, about the weather, about memories they used to share. He played Jonah's favorite songs, sometimes even strumming old tunes on a guitar they once fought over. He recited jokes and told stories, not because he thought they'd be heard, but because the silence terrified him more than the sound of his own cracking voice. People in town talked. Some called him a martyr, others a fool. The social worker who visited once a month never said much, but Eli could see in her eyes pity and maybe a hint of suspicion. "You're too young for this kind of life," she had once told him. He didn't answer. There was no point. Every night, before crawling into his cot, Eli stood beside Jonah's bed and whispered the same words. "I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." And he meant it. Even if Jonah never woke up, even if the rest of the world forgot they existed, Eli would stay. He had made a promise, to Jonah, to himself. Because in a world that had given up on both of them, that promise was all he had left. He didn't think about the future. Couldn't. He didn't imagine what his life would have been if the accident never happened. Didn't picture college, girlfriends, dreams. All of that was locked behind a door he refused to open. Instead, he measured time in small victories. No bed sores this week, a steady heart rate, the way Jonah's breathing calmed when Eli sang to him. These became milestones in a life reduced to caretaking. Some nights, though, when the wind was especially loud and the isolation crept in too close, Eli would press his forehead to the cold window pane and whisper, "Please, just one sign you're still in there, that I'm not alone in this." But nothing ever came. Still he stayed, through the bitter winters and the unbearable summers, through birthdays passed in silence and holidays marked only by a different meal on the tray, through the moments of doubt so thick he could barely breathe. The weight of Jonah's care was more than physical. It was emotional, spiritual. It pressed down on Eli's chest every day, stealing bits of who he used to be. Yet something inside him, something deeper than duty, refused to let go. Because when the rest of the world chose to walk away, Eli chose to stay. He didn't know it then, but that choice would change everything. And soon, The silence would finally break. The morning the blink happened began like any other. Eli stirred awake before the sun had fully risen, blinking away the remnants of a dream he couldn't remember. The air in the farmhouse was chilly, crisp enough to make him shiver as he pulled on his threadbare hoodie. He shuffled to the kitchen, started the kettle, and prepared Jonah's oatmeal. Same ratio of water and oats, same dash of cinnamon. It had become mechanical by now. The way he stirred, the way he poured, the way he moved through the house as though navigating a loop that never truly ended. Jonah lay as he always did, propped against pillows, his face angled slightly toward the window. A blanket was draped over his legs, his hands resting limply on the bed's edge. Eli approached with a bowl of oatmeal, balancing it on his knee as he sat beside him. "Morning, man," Eli said softly, as he always did. He picked up the spoon, scooped a modest portion, and gently brought it to Jonah's mouth. The process required patience, guiding the spoon past lips that barely parted, ensuring he didn't choke. Eli watched the slow swallow, then prepared another spoonful. That's when it happened. Just as he lifted the spoon again, Jonah blinked. Not a lazy, reflexive flutter like Eli had seen 1,000 times before, but a slow, deliberate closing and opening of his eyes. Eli froze, spoon suspended in the air, heart thudding. He waited, unsure. A full 5 seconds passed before Jonah did it again. Another blink, slower this time. Just one. Eli's voice caught in his throat. He set the spoon down, leaned in closer, eyes wide. "Jonah," he whispered. No response. Not a twitch, not a sound. Just stillness again. Eli glanced at the bowl, wondering if he had imagined it. Stress and exhaustion played tricks on people. Maybe that was all this was, wishful thinking. But then Jonah's lips moved, just slightly. A twitch, subtle and small, but enough to pull Eli's breath from his lungs. He sat there for several minutes, unmoving, eyes locked on his brother's face. When nothing else happened, he finally rose, backed away, and paced the room. He didn't tell anyone. Who was there to tell anyway? But that night, long after the last of the dishes were washed and the lights were turned off, Eli sat at the foot of Jonah's bed, staring into the dark. "Did you blink on purpose?" he asked the shadows. Was that real? He received no answer, but his mind couldn't let it go. The image replayed in his head again and again as he lay in his cot, unable to sleep. He had seen it. He was sure. That blink had intention. The next morning, Eli returned to Jonah with something new in mind. A test. "If you can hear me," he said gently, "I want you to blink once." Nothing. He tried again, a little louder, a little more hopeful. "Jonah, blink once. Just once." A full minute passed. Then, slowly, deliberately, Jonah blinked. Eli stepped back, eyes wide, his breath caught in his chest. "Okay," he said, voice trembling. Okay. Now blink twice." Jonah's eyes remained open. Eli felt a wave of dizziness. This was real. He wasn't imagining things. Something inside Jonah had shifted. There was someone in there. Someone aware. From that moment, everything changed. Eli cleared the clutter from a nearby table and set up a notebook and a pen. He scribbled down a chart, 1 blink for yes, 2 for no. Then he sat beside Jonah, pen in hand. "Are you awake in there?" 1 blink. "Do you know who I am?" 1 blink. "Do you remember what happened?" Another blink. Each time, Eli's hand shook as he wrote the answers. His throat tightened, eyes burning. "You been in there this whole time?" 1 blink. Tears slipped down Eli's cheeks before he could stop them. He pressed his palm over his mouth, unable to breathe. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know. I thought you were gone." Jonah didn't blink that time, just stared at him, unmoving. But Eli could feel something in the room had shifted. A presence, a connection. For the next few days, Eli refined the system. He asked simple yes or no questions. He watched the pattern, careful not to misread reflexes. And the more he asked, the more certain he became that Jonah was responding. He wasn't just reacting, he was communicating. Eli spent hours talking to him. Sometimes he asked about old memories, camping trips, birthdays, inside jokes from school. The answers came in slow, deliberate blinks, but they were clear. Jonah remembered everything. One afternoon, Eli asked, "Do you feel pain?" 2 blinks. Relief surged through him, followed by guilt. That's good. I mean, thank God. Do you get scared?" 1 blink. Eli's stomach dropped. "Do you want to try to get better?" 1 blink. Eli nodded, wiping his face. "Then we'll figure it out. Whatever it takes. I swear." That night, unable to sleep again, Eli sat with his notebook, scribbling ideas, thoughts, questions he still wanted to ask. At the top of the page, he wrote, "He's still here." But even with the progress, doubts crept in. He feared telling anyone. What if no one believed him? What if they tried to take Jonah away? Claimed he was imagining it all? No, this was their secret for now. Just the 2 of them. No doctors. No strangers. Not yet. 2 nights later, something new happened. As Eli was preparing Jonah for bed, he noticed his brother blinking at a different rhythm. Faster, more deliberate, like he was trying to get his attention. "Jonah? What is it?" Jonah blinked once, paused, then again. Then again. Eli squinted. "What are you doing?" Another sequence. Short blink, long blink, pause. Eli frowned. "That's not yes or no." Jonah blinked 3 times in quick succession, then paused. Then 2 more. It clicked. Eli scrambled for the notebook, flipping pages, scrawling down the blinks. He compared the sequences to a Morse code chart he found years ago at a garage sale and had never thrown away. His heart raced as he translated, letter by letter. I, H, A, V, E, A, P, L, A, N. Eli stared at the message, stunned. He looked at Jonah, whose eyes now seemed clearer than ever. "A plan?" Eli asked. "For what?" Jonah blinked twice, no. Then he started blinking again, slowly, carefully. I, A-M, W-I-T-H-Y. "Oh, you?" Eli dropped the pen. For a long time, he said nothing. The farmhouse was silent, but the air felt electric. "You're with me?" he repeated, voice hoarse. 1 blink. This time, when Eli cried, it wasn't from sorrow. It was the beginning of something new. By the end of the week, the silence in the farmhouse no longer felt oppressive. It felt alive. There was something electric in the air, something neither of them could name yet. Eli had taken carrying the notebook everywhere, obsessively recording every blink, every sequence, every pause. Jonah, once just a presence in the room, had become a voice, slow, fragmented, but unmistakably there. The realization continued to settle over Eli like dawn. His brother had not only returned, but had never really left. Eli began formalizing their communication, refining the process into a consistent language. He created a laminated sheet with Morse code letters and numbers, printed from a library down in town, and tacked it to the wall near Jonah's bed. It served as their mutual reference, helping them track blinks of letters without needing to guess. Eli even rigged a small flashlight to use as a visual metronome, helping Jonah pace his sequences when they grew longer or more complex. But Jonah didn't just want to chat. He wanted answers. He blinked sequences relentlessly, sometimes stringing together partial thoughts that Eli had to interpret and reassemble. On one cold evening, after nearly an hour of painstaking code, the message was clear. "What year is it?" Eli hesitated before answering. "It's 2025, he said softly. Jonah blinked. "What happened after the accident?" Eli sat down. "A lot," he murmured. "Too much." He kept the summary simple, omitting the abandonment, the loneliness, the depression that had nearly consumed him. Instead, he focused on the essentials, the recovery, the routines, the fact that they were still together. But Jonah was not satisfied with vague comfort. He began asking for specific information. Where is Dad? Why did no one come? Why am I still here? Eli could only answer what he knew. Dad left. So did Mom. Maggie, Leah, they didn't know how to deal with it. I don't think any of them really believed you were still in there. Jonah blinked twice. No. Eli asked, "You think there's another reason?" 1 blink. that sent a jolt through him. He hadn't considered that possibility. But the more he looked at Jonah, the more he recognized the intensity behind those eyes. There was anger there, controlled, silent, but very real. Did something happen before the crash? Eli asked slowly. Jonah blinked once. Something important? Another blink. Eli swallowed. We'll get there, one step at a time. But the questions didn't stop. Jonah pushed every day, forcing Eli to dig deeper into memories he had long tried to bury. When Jonah asked for names of the doctors, Eli read off the medical records. When Jonah asked about visitors in the early days, Eli recounted what he could remember. With each session, the puzzle expanded. It wasn't just about communication anymore. It was about reclaiming agency. Jonah began asking to be moved more frequently. Change position, he blinked one morning. The following day, try. Eli supported him upright in bed, using cushions and makeshift braces. Jonah's head lolled at first, neck muscles trembling from disuse. But over time, with repetition, he began holding his gaze forward for minutes at a time. There was a quiet rhythm to their days now. Mornings were for feeding and cleaning. Midday was for communication drills, coding sequences, and tracking progress. Evenings were for therapy, stretching Jonah's arms, helping him attempt small, isolated movements. Eli had no professional training, but desperation fueled his creativity. He watched online videos in the dead of night, studying physical therapy techniques, modifying them for the limited tools and resources they had. Some efforts failed miserably. Once, he tried using weighted cuffs to stimulate Jonah's muscle response, but the strain made Jonah blink pain until Eli yanked him off in a panic. Another time, Eli tried an old massage tool to stimulate nerve endings, but it startled Jonah so badly he blinked stop before Eli even turned it fully on. Still, there were victories. Jonah managed to clench his left fingers once, just for a second, but enough to make Eli shout in surprise. Another time, he moved his jaw ever so slightly, as if trying to form a word, though no sound came out. "I think you're waking up," Eli whispered that night, brushing hair away from Jonah's forehead, piece by piece. Jonah blinked once. Progress accelerated in the strangest ways. Jonah began predicting Eli's questions before he finished asking. One afternoon, Eli was flipping through bills and muttering about groceries when Jonah blinked rapidly. Eli turned. Something wrong. Jonah blinked 3 times, then paused, then began a new sequence. Eli reached for the notebook, transcribed it slowly. "You forgot the milk again." Eli stared at him, mouth open. "Are you kidding me?" Jonah blinked once. It was the first time Eli had laughed in weeks. But not all moments were lighthearted. One night, while thunder rolled over fields and the sky cracked with lightning, Jonah blinked out a long, complex message. Eli had to double-check it 3 times before he dared read it aloud. "Did they try to shut me up?" The sentence made Eli sit back. "Ooh." Jonah blinked a sequence he had never used before. "I can't say yet." That phrase haunted Eli for days. He began reviewing Jonah's old journals, poring over hospital records again. Somewhere, buried in the forgotten paperwork and Jonah's fragmented memory, was a story that had never been told. And whatever it was, Jonah wasn't ready to share it. Yet, later that week, something shifted again. Jonah requested to practice yes/no communication without blinks. He tried micro movements instead, slight shifts in fingers, tongue, eyebrows. Eli adapted, watching closely for patterns. In time, they combined methods. A blink followed by a twitch, a nod that wasn't quite a nod but close enough. Jonah wasn't just learning how to speak. He was rebuilding control one fragment at a time. Eli started making recordings, not of Jonah's face, but the messages they decoded, the times they occurred, the context. He labeled everything. Something inside him told him this wasn't just recovery, it was evidence. But of what, he still didn't know. Late one night, when the rain had quieted and the wind had returned to its whisper, Jonah gave one last message before sleep. "It's starting." Eli stared at the notebook, unsure what he meant. But deep inside, he believed it too. Eli hadn't planned on returning to the basement that night. The room was cold, partially flooded in one corner from years of water damage, and most of the old boxes smelled like mildew and mothballs. But after Jonah's cryptic message, "It's starting," and his refusal to elaborate, Eli couldn't sit idle. Something was shifting in his brother's memory, and whatever it was, it didn't just involve healing. It involved danger, secrets, and maybe even betrayal. The stairs creaked under his weight as he descended, flashlight in hand. Dust floated in the beam, thick as smoke. Rows of boxes lined the far wall, many untouched since their parents had left. Eli moved slowly, checking labels, brushing aside cobwebs. Most of it was junk, holiday decorations, old-school projects, clothes no one had worn in over a decade. But one battered box tucked under a tarp caught his eye. The handwriting on the side read, "Jonah, medical plus personal." Eli crouched, dragging it into the center of the room. The top was taped shut, but the seal had weakened with time. He peeled it open, revealing a stack of folders, notebooks, and several labeled DVDs. Hospital forms, scan results, therapist notes. He recognized some of them from earlier visits, but others were entirely new. He brought the box upstairs, set it on the kitchen table, and began sifting through the contents. Hours passed. Night gave way to early dawn. And with every page, Eli's confusion turned to dread. There were inconsistencies, notes from two different neurologists contradicting each other. One listed Jonah's condition as vegetative, but another, dated only 2 weeks later, used the term locked-in syndrome in pencil, then scribbled over in black ink. Another document was a printed email chain, barely legible, but included one line that stood out. "If we leave it coded this way, no one outside the family will ever know." Eli read it twice, heart pounding. He flipped to a handwritten letter tucked inside one of the folders, and signed but written in his mother's cursive. The words were jagged, rushed. "We can't tell him. If Eli finds out, he'll never let go. He'll stay, and this place will eat him alive. He deserves more than this. But I don't know how to make peace with what we've done. I just pray Jonah doesn't remember." Eli lowered the letter slowly. His mouth had gone dry. He didn't know what horrified him more, that they had suspected Jonah was still conscious, or that they had kept it from him deliberately. He went to Jonah's room and sat beside him, hands trembling. "I found something," he whispered. "Something bad." Jonah blinked once. Eli held up the letter. "Did you know they suspected?" Jonah blinked once, then again, yes, then no. "You remember part of it?" One blink. Eli exhaled. "They left us here because they knew. Because if the truth came out, someone would be held responsible." Jonah blinked again, deliberate, slow. "Do you think someone did this on purpose?" Eli asked. Jonah blinked. One. It felt like the air had been sucked from the room. Eli stood, pacing. So it wasn't just an accident. He looked at Jonah. Was it the brakes? Did something happen with the car? Jonah blinked once. Then again. A pause. Then one more blink. Yes. No. Then yes again. Eli frowned. "You're not sure." Jonah blinked once. "But you remember something." Another blink. They worked through the rest of the morning, trying to pull out pieces. Jonah blinked out a sequence. Saw Dad with papers. Another. Argued night before. And then he was scared. Eli jotted everything down, page after page, watching as the pieces slowly formed a web of suspicion. There had been tension in the family before the accident. Arguments about money, land, the farm's inheritance. Jonah had been the oldest, the one with access to records, the one who asked questions. Eli found one of Jonah's old journals buried in the box. He flipped through it, skimming entries from months before the accident. One page was dog-eared. He stopped, scanning the messy handwriting. Something's wrong with the deeds. Dad won't explain. Says not to worry. But I saw discrepancies. 2 parcels listed under Carter Holdings, LLC, not our name. Why lie? Talk to Uncle Ray. He told me to keep quiet. Another entry, dated a week later. Talk to Mom. She looked panicked. Told me to drop it. Said it could bring everything down. What the hell is going on? Eli stared at the page, his jaw clenched. He returned to Jonah's room, journal in hand. You were investigating something, weren't you? Jonah blinked once. And you think the crash was someone trying to stop you? Another blink. Eli knelt beside him. Jonah, if this is true, we need more than just memories. We need proof. Jonah began blinking rapidly. Eli grabbed the Morse sheet. Below, toolshed floor. Eli froze. There's something buried there? One blink. Without another word, Eli threw on his boots and grabbed a flashlight. The tool shed sat crooked at the edge of the property, near the fence line where the grass grew tall and wild. He hadn't opened it in months. Inside, the air smelled of rust and oil. Tools lined the walls, many untouched since their father's departure. In the far corner, beneath an old workbench, was a section of plywood that didn't match the rest of the floor. Eli pried it up. Beneath was a shallow hollow, and inside it, a metal cash box, rusted shut. He brought it back to the house, cracked it open with a crowbar, and stared. Inside were several manila envelopes, each packed with documents. Deeds, land transfers, correspondence, most bearing the Carter family name, some signed by their father, others with initials scrawled hurriedly at the bottom. But the most damning piece was a printed bank statement from an offshore account in Belize, listing several deposits linked to property sales. Sales Eli had never heard of. Sales that shouldn't have been legal under the farm's trust. He stared at the papers, the weight of it all pressing down on his chest. Jonah, he said quietly, this is big. If what you found led to this, if someone tried to stop you because of these papers. Jonah blinked once. They lied to us. All of them. One blink. Eli closed the box, locking it tight. He sat beside Jonah in the dim room, the rain beginning to tap against the windows. You've been locked in your body for 3 years, Eli whispered. And all this time, you remember what they tried to bury. Jonah blinked again, slow, measured. Eli reached for the notebook. Then we're not burying anymore. The days that followed Eli's discovery in the tool shed passed in a haze of questions and preparation. Every spare moment was spent cataloging the documents, scanning them at the library down in town, and organizing them into a makeshift evidence board on the farmhouse wall. It was chaotic and rudimentary, but it helped Eli keep track of what they had and what was still missing. Jonah had become more active in his own quiet way. Each day, he blinked with more speed and confidence, often prompting Eli before he could even ask. Their sessions had transformed into investigations. Eli would read off items, and Jonah would confirm, deny, or expand. At night, they reviewed the day's findings, refining theories and mapping timelines. But something new was forming between the blinks. It began when Jonah stopped answering yes-no questions altogether, even when the answers were simple. He started blinking in full Morse code again, not just phrases, but thoughts. Complex ones. At first, Eli assumed it was an error in pacing, maybe fatigue. But on the third day of this, Jonah blinked out a message that changed everything. I need to tell you something no one else can know. Eli read the message twice, stunned. He nodded, grabbed the notebook, and sat. Okay, he said softly. I'm listening. Jonah took longer than usual between sequences, forcing Eli to read with care. The message came through like slow-drip water. When I was in the car, before the crash, I knew they were following me. Eli's heart picked up. Who? The next phrase took nearly half an hour to decode. I think it was someone Dad worked with. A man in a silver truck. He was behind me for miles. Eli felt a chill climb his spine. And the crash? Brakes stopped working. I had tried to turn off the road. IT didn't work. Jonah paused, then blinked again. I remember his face. I've seen him before. At our house. Eli scribbled furiously, committing every detail to paper. Why didn't you say this earlier? He asked aloud, more to himself than to Jonah. Jonah blinked slowly. I didn't remember until I heard the wind. Eli frowned. The wind? Jonah began blinking again, and this time it was one word, repeated over and over. Trigger. Eli leaned back, processing. Something about the storm, about the sound, brought it back. One blink. They sat in silence for a while, the only noise the ticking of the clock in the hallway. That night, after Jonah was settled and the farmhouse had gone still, Eli stayed up rereading his notes. The name Carter Holdings LLC kept surfacing. So did a lawyer named Halbert Green, someone Eli had never heard of but who appeared on multiple land documents. He wrote the name in bold red ink and circled it. The next morning, Jonah began blinking before Eli even entered the room fully. "We have to move." Eli blinked, caught off guard. "Move where?" Jonah blinked a longer message. "Not U.S. The files. Someone will come." Eli turned slowly to look at the box on the table. "You think they know we found them?" One blink. That afternoon, Eli drove into town and used a friend scanner at the hardware store to make digital copies of every document. He saved them to a USB drive and stashed it under a loose floorboard in the pantry. Then he mailed a second copy, encrypted, to a private email address he had set up with a randomly generated password. That night, Jonah blinked out a new phrase. "Now I can tell you my plan." Eli leaned in, notebook in hand. "Go ahead." Jonah began with short bursts, then longer ones. The message came together slowly, but when it was done, Eli read it aloud. "First, you build something. Something that can make my voice heard without you." Eli looked up. "You mean an assistive tech device?" Jonah blinked once. Eli ran a hand through his hair. "I don't have money for that kind of equipment." Jonah blinked again. "Build it." Eli sat back, thinking. He'd seen a video once, a quadriplegic veteran using eye-tracking software to type. It used a cheap webcam and open-source code. If he could find the right tutorials, maybe he could cobble together something similar. "Okay," he said slowly. "If I do this, if we can get you communicating faster, what happens next?" Jonah began blinking again. The next phrase took almost 45 minutes to decode. "I will tell them what happened. To me, to Dad, to MOM, to everyone." Eli nodded, feeling the gravity of it. "And you think anyone will believe us?" Jonah blinked a single word. "Proof." The following day, Eli scoured local tech forums and pieced together a plan. He borrowed an old laptop from a friend at the feed store. He found a working webcam in a thrift shop bin for $5. And from a YouTube rabbit hole, he discovered a small community of DIY caregivers who had built similar systems using open-source eye-tracking software. By the third night, the software was installed. It was crude, slow, and constantly lagged. But when Eli positioned the webcam correctly and adjusted contrast, the screen responded to Jonah's gaze. A cursor moved across the alphabet. Letters blinked when Jonah stared long enough. The first full sentence Jonah typed wasn't about land deeds or secrets. It was simple. "I'm still here." Eli read it, then looked up at him, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Yeah," he said, "you really are." They spent the rest of the evening refining the system, adjusting font size and tracking sensitivity. Eli taped large letters on the wall to make practice easier. Jonah's speed improved with each session. By midnight, he had written a second sentence. "I'm with you." That same phrase he had blinked days ago. Eli wrote it on a sticky note and posted it above the bed. Jonah typed again slowly. Never alone. It was more than a message. It was a vow. As the wind picked up outside and the night settled into its quiet rhythm, Eli sat beside his brother and stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. For the first time in years, they had more than hope. They had a voice. Eli had just finished tightening the last screw on the makeshift bracket for Jonah's eye tracker when he heard the crunch of tires outside. It wasn't a delivery truck or a neighbor's slow-moving tractor. This was a sharper sound, deliberate and unfamiliar. He froze. They weren't expecting anyone. No one ever came out this far. He crossed to the front window, peeling back the curtain with 2 fingers. A rental car sat in the driveway. From the driver's side emerged a woman in her 50s, tall, sharply dressed, and holding a leather folder. Her red scarf whipped in the breeze. Eli's stomach turned before he fully processed her face. It was his mother. He hadn't seen her in years. Not since she'd sent that final Christmas card with no return address, no signature, just a typed message wishing the boys well. And now, out of nowhere, she stood on the porch, knocking like she belonged there. Eli opened the door slowly. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, as if no time had passed. He didn't speak. He didn't move. "I was in town," she continued, adjusting the folder under her arm. "Thought I'd stop by." Eli's voice was cold when it finally came. "How did you know we were still here?" Her smile faltered. "You know how small towns are. Word gets around." "No one in town's seen you since the funeral," Eli replied. She stepped inside, uninvited. "I'm not here to fight. I just want to talk." Eli followed her cautiously to the kitchen. "Talk about what?" She placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were papers, legal documents, signatures, an official letterhead. "I want to sell the house," she said. "We can split whatever it's worth. You've done enough here, Eli. You deserve a life." He stared at her, incredulous. "You want to sell this?" "It's not practical for you to stay. It's falling apart. And let's be honest, Jonah isn't functional." She said the word with such clinical detachment that Eli had to clench his fist to stay calm. "Get out," he said. "Eli." He took a step forward. "You left us. You knew he wasn't brain dead. You knew." Her lips tightened. "That's not fair. I found your letter." That stopped her. "You knew about the misdiagnosis. You knew he could still be in there. And you walked away. You all did." She didn't deny it. Instead, she sighed and looked down at the folder. It was too much. You don't know what it was like watching him lie there day after day. Eli's voice rose. "I do know. I've been here every day since you left." The silence stretched between them. Finally, she said, "You're not on the deed. Legally, I can sell it without you." From the hallway, the voice came. No. It was hoarse, croaking, barely audible, but unmistakably human. Eli's head whipped around. Jonah had spoken. It was just one word, but it shook the air like thunder. Eli ran to his side. His brother's eyes were wild, locked on their mother. She had turned pale, her mouth slightly open. "Jonah," she whispered. He tried again. His lips moved, dry and trembling. The word was clearer this time. "No." The silence that followed was deeper than anything Eli had ever felt. His mother stumbled back. "That's not possible," she whispered. He can't." "He can," Eli said. "He is. And you're not selling anything." She looked from one brother to the other. Her legs buckled slightly as she sat down. Eli retrieved the laptop and set up the eye-tracking system. Jonah's gaze locked onto the screen. Slowly, the cursor moved, clicking letters. "You left me." She read the message as it appeared. Jonah blinked once, his new way of punctuating a sentence. Her hands trembled. "I didn't know what to do," she said, voice cracking. "We thought it was better this way. We didn't want you to suffer. You made it worse." "I'm sorry," she said, barely audible. Jonah typed again. "Sorry is easy." Eli stood beside him, jaw clenched. "You have no legal right anymore. If you try anything, we'll go public with what you knew, what everyone in this family knew." She looked at the screen, the words, her sons. Then she stood, adjusted her scarf, and walked to the door. Before stepping out, she turned back. "You don't know the whole story, Eli. Your father, he wasn't just hiding money. He was hiding things that could destroy more than this farm. Then maybe it's time they get destroyed." She didn't answer. After she was gone, Jonah typed again. "She's afraid." Eli nodded. "Good." Later that night, while the wind curled through the trees and the house creaked with its old familiar sounds, Eli sat beside Jonah with the fire burning low. "She wants the land," he said. "That's what this is about." Jonah typed slowly. "It's the last piece." Eli frowned. "Piece of what?" "Of the cover-up." Eli stared at him. "What's buried here?" Jonah didn't answer with words. He lifted his left hand, barely, shakily, but enough, and pointed toward the west field. It was the first time he had moved on his own. The morning after Jonah lifted his hand and pointed to the west field, the air around the farmhouse felt different. Not just heavier, but charged. The gesture, small, nearly imperceptible, had felt like a warning, a direction, and a declaration all at once. Eli had barely slept. He stayed up reading through Jonah's decoded messages, reviewing the files they had copied, and trying to guess what could possibly be buried under that dry, silent stretch of land they had never touched. But before any digging or decoding could continue, Jonah made a new request, typed slowly, steadily across the eye tracker interface. The message was clear. I need physical therapy. Now! Eli stared at the words, blinking in disbelief. You really think you're ready for that? He asked, kneeling beside the bed. Jonah didn't blink. He kept his gaze fixed forward. You're not just asking for stretches anymore, Eli said. You mean real therapy. Sitting up, muscle engagement, weight shifts. Jonah blinked once. The message that followed was typed letter by letter. If I'm going to stand, I need to start. The weight of the statement struck Eli hard. He hadn't dared imagine Jonah walking again. Not really. Not after years of stillness. But if Jonah believed it was possible, that belief itself was a kind of proof. Still, the task ahead felt monumental. Eli spent the next 2 days gathering everything he could. He scoured message boards, downloaded PDFs from physical therapy training sites, and printed exercise charts from public library computers. He salvaged old yoga mats, belts, and a shower chair from the town's donation center. He even convinced a retired physical therapist to let him borrow outdated equipment. Foam blocks, resistance bands, and a dilapidated tilt table missing one leg. He reinforced the table with scraps and tested it for balance. It would have to do. The first session started at dawn. Eli wrapped the gait belt around Jonah's torso, securing it beneath his arms. Then, slowly, he guided his brother from lying to a partial sitting position. The support pillows helped, but Jonah's head sagged, his neck trembling with the effort of holding itself upright. It's okay, Eli said quietly. You're doing better than you think. Jonah blinked once, then again, long, deliberate. Eli read the blinks on the Morse code chart. Start timer. Eli smiled. All right. He set a stopwatch on the nightstand and held Jonah steady. The minutes passed slowly, filled with quiet breathing, small adjustments, and tremors that rippled through Jonah's shoulders. After just 5 minutes, his body began to tremble harder, and Eli eased him back down. That's enough for today, he said, voice soft. We'll go again tomorrow. Jonah blinked 3 times. We go again now. Eli sighed. Of course we do. Over the next week, their days became a rigid cycle of feeding, rest, and therapy. Jonah's body responded in increments, twitches becoming extensions, spasms becoming intent. He pushed his limits, and Eli, though cautious, followed his lead. Every evening, Eli documented progress in a leather-bound journal. Degree of angle held, time sustained, muscles activated. He took videos, too, storing them in cloud folders with date stamps and notes in case they ever needed to prove just how far Jonah had come. It wasn't just about the body. It was about readiness, strength, control. Midway through the second week, something extraordinary happened. Jonah, now able to sit unassisted for just under 7 minutes, typed a message. Try standing. Eli froze, the air thick between them. You're serious? He asked. Jonah blinked once. Eli checked the gait belt again, braced Jonah's legs, and slowly guided his feet to floor. The tilt table had been reconfigured with straps to stabilize the knees, and Eli kept a death grip on Jonah's waist the entire time. Jonah leaned forward, trembled, and lifted, not fully, not completely upright, but enough for Eli to feel the shift. He was pushing weight into his legs. Eli gasped, You're doing it. Jonah's face twisted with exertion, a faint wince crossing his brow. Okay, back down. He lowered him carefully, helped him recline, and sat beside him, both of them breathing hard. Jonah's jaw clenched, his lips parted, and then, in a raspy voice so raw it was barely recognizable, again. Eli nearly dropped the stopwatch. He smiled. Tomorrow, he said, still breathless. We'll go again tomorrow. Every day after that, they repeated the exercise. Jonah's body, though slow to respond, began adapting. His quadriceps stiffened during attempts. His ankles started to bear flickers of tension. His voice came in fragments now, raspy and broken but improving with each whisper. The biggest milestone came on a gray afternoon when the skies threatened rain, but held back just enough to let them work. Jonah had been standing fully with help for just under a minute. Eli counted down the last 5 seconds aloud, and when he said time, Jonah didn't collapse. He didn't sway. He stood there, not just with Eli's help, but by some strength of his own. Eli's hand hovered nearby, ready to catch him, but Jonah didn't fall. For 3 full seconds, he stood on his own. When they lowered him back to the mat, Jonah typed a single word, real. That night, as Eli warmed soup in the kitchen, Jonah typed another message, she'll come back. Eli set the spoon down. You mean Mom? Jonah blinked once. She wants a farm. That hasn't changed. The screen updated again. She's not alone. Eli froze. What does that mean? Jonah's answer came slowly. Someone else wants it too. Eli remembered the papers, the offshore transfers, the land sales. She's not just trying to take it back, he said quietly. She's finishing what Dad started. Jonah didn't blink. He didn't have to. His silence was answer enough. The days following Jonah's first sustained stand passed in a blur of effort and exhaustion. Each session pushed him further, and Eli adjusted their schedule to give his brother time to recover between therapy intervals. The farmhouse, once haunted by stillness, now echoed with the subtle rhythm of progress. Rushed footsteps, grunts of strain, and a quiet, triumphant thud of Jonah shifting in place. Every movement was a fight, but every success, however minor, felt like a revolution. They had started drafting a plan, a real one. If Jonah could stand, he could eventually walk. If he could walk, he could appear in court, speak to the media, or deliver testimony. Eli had started recording more video evidence, logging each session in dated folders, and organizing the paper trail they had amassed into labeled binders. The evidence wasn't just about the land or the crash anymore. It was about resilience, recovery, and truth. But as their momentum grew, so did the tension in the air. It began with a knock at the door. Eli opened it to find a woman with a clipboard standing on the porch, her expression unreadable behind large square glasses. She wore a state-issued badge and a laminated tag clipped to her coat. "Mr. Carter?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Janine Cross. I'm with Adult Protective Services. We received an anonymous tip concerning your brother's condition." Eli's blood ran cold. "What kind of tip?" She stepped inside without waiting for permission, already surveying the space. Concerns regarding neglect, possible unlicensed medical procedures, inadequate living conditions. You understand we have to follow up on all reports. Eli followed her into the living room. "There's no neglect here. I take care of it myself." She eyed the equipment, some of it clearly homemade, and then her gaze settled on Jonah, who was propped upright in his chair, a harness across his chest. She moved closer. "Does he respond to verbal cues?" she asked clinically. Eli opened his mouth, but Jonah answered first. "Blink," he rasped. "Once for yes." The social worker froze. "Excuse me." Jonah lifted his eyes to meet hers and blinked. Once. Slowly. Intentionally. Eli added, "He can also type with his eyes. We use assistive software." Janine's tone remained neutral. "Is this technology documented and approved by a physician?" "No, but..." "Do you have a licensed therapist overseeing his recovery?" "No, but I've researched." She interrupted again, her voice sharper this time. "You're not qualified, Mr. Carter. No certification, no oversight, no medical supervision." Eli stepped forward. "With respect, we've done more in the last 3 weeks than any facility has done in 3 years." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took out her phone and began snapping photos of Jonah, of the setup, of the floor, of the equipment. "You'll receive a follow-up notice," she said. "Until then, I'm obligated to report the situation to our medical compliance team." Before she left, she asked for copies of Jonah's medical records. Eli hesitated, then walked to the cabinet and retrieved a folder, but not the real one. He handed over a decoy set, filled with old scans and generic notes. As soon as the door closed behind her, He turned to Jonah. That wasn't random. Jonah typed fast, his gaze fierce. We've been exposed. Eli stared at the screen. Do you think Mom sent her? Yes. She wants us discredited. Or removed. That night, Eli triple-checked every document. The original files were hidden, encrypted, duplicated. But it didn't calm the dread in his chest. He sat awake for hours, staring at the binders, wondering how much time they had before someone came back. This time, with authority. The next morning, he noticed a drawer in Jonah's room was open. He never left it open. Inside, 2 folders were missing. Did you move something? He asked. Jonah blinked twice. No. Eli scanned the room, then rushed to the kitchen. The side door had been unlocked. He always locked it. Always. He checked the pantry, the hidden USB beneath the floorboard. It was still there, but the hard copy backups? Gone. He paced the room, heart hammering. Someone's been inside. Jonah's voice came again, low, broken, but audible. She came back. Eli turned to him, eyes narrowing. While I slept. Eli's heart dropped. He hadn't heard anything. No creaking floorboards. No car. Nothing. But Jonah's gaze was unwavering. She had key. Of course she did. Their mother still had access. The locks had never been changed. They worked quickly that day. Eli installed new deadbolts on every door and moved the most sensitive files to a storage unit 15 miles away. He set up a motion-activated camera on the front porch, then another at the back door. He even left an old phone recording on a loop inside the living room, just in case. But the damage had already been done. That afternoon, Eli received an official letter from the county. A scheduled evaluation had been placed for Jonah's welfare. In 2 days, a licensed medical professional would arrive with legal authority to assess the need for involuntary transfer to a long-term care facility. Eli stood frozen, the letter shaking in his hand. He brought it to Jonah, who read it in silence. Then, slowly, he typed, "If they take me, the truth dies." Eli sat down hard beside him. "We're not going to let that happen." Jonah typed again. "They're scared." Eli read the next sentence carefully, the letters appearing one by one. "Because I remember." The morning of the evaluation arrived with a gray, flat sky, and air, so still it felt like the world had paused to watch. Eli had been up since 4, preparing everything. He cleaned the living room, organized a therapy setup to look as professional as possible, and ensured every document they were willing to share was neatly laid out on the table. But inside, he was bracing for war. The man who arrived wasn't what Eli expected. No suit, no clipboard. He wore jeans, a plain jacket, and a shoulder bag slung across his chest. His demeanor was calm, unreadable. "Dr. Nathan Levins," he said, offering a hand. "I've been sent to evaluate Jonah's cognitive and physical condition, and to assess whether this environment meets minimum standards for care." Eli shook his hand. "Everything's set up. I'll show you." The evaluation began with quiet observation. Dr. Levins watched as Eli guided Jonah through a sitting exercise, noted the eye-tracking software in action, and reviewed some of the video logs. He took occasional notes, but said little. Jonah remained calm, steady, participating without hesitation. After nearly an hour, the doctor asked to speak to Jonah alone. Eli hesitated, but Jonah blinked once, giving permission. Eli waited outside the room, pacing the hall, listening through the crack in the door. The conversation was hushed but clear. "Do you understand where you are?" the doctor asked. "Yes," Jonah rasped. "Do you feel safe here?" "Yes." "Do you want to remain in this home, with your brother as your caregiver?" Jonah looked up at the monitor and typed, "I'm more than safe. I'm alive." There was silence. Then the doctor said quietly, "Thank you." When Eli returned, the doctor closed his notepad and stood. "I'll file my report this evening," he said. "But off the record, what you've done here, it's remarkable." Eli blinked, stunned. "You're not going to recommend a transfer?" "No," he replied. "I'm going to recommend support, not removal. What Jonah has achieved defies the prognosis I read before I came. He's not only conscious, he's recovering. Relief crashed through Eli's chest like a tidal wave. "Thank you," he said, breathless. But before the doctor left, he paused at the door. "There's something else you should know. This order, it didn't come from a random tip. The request originated from a private legal firm in Topeka. They pushed hard. When I dug into the name on the file, it led to an inactive company, Carter Holdings, LLC. Eli froze. "That's my father's company." The doctor nodded once. "Be careful." After he left, Eli brought the information to Jonah. He typed, "They're trying to erase me." Eli didn't deny it. "They tried to silence you the night of the crash. And when that failed, they abandoned you. Now they're pushing again because you're becoming visible." Jonah typed again. "We need to finish the story." The puzzle wasn't finished, but pieces were beginning to lock into place. They returned to the documents in the storage unit. Eli had flagged several unfamiliar names from property sales, names that appeared multiple times on different parcels transferred through shell companies. One of them stood out, Richard J. Murrow. Jonah typed it, without prompting the next morning. Eli blinked. "You know that name?" Jonah nodded slowly. He typed, "He met with Dad 2 weeks before crash." In the kitchen, Eli scrambled to match it with the records. Murrow had been listed as the agent on a land transfer dated just days before Jonah's accident. Land that should have never been sold, as it fell under trust protection. Was Murrow the man in the silver truck? Eli asked. Jonah blinked once, then added, "He had a scar on his neck." Eli opened the file photos he had saved from online searches. Murrow was in one of them, smiling, shaking hands with the county commissioner. Eli zoomed in. There was, just visible under the collar of his shirt, a faint scar running diagonally from ear to jaw. Jonah typed, "That's him." Everything began to align. The night of the crash, Jonah had been returning from a meeting with a law student he'd contacted about the land documents. The call logs proved it. The files recovered from the tool shed showed deed discrepancies that could implicate multiple parties, his father, Murrow, and even a county clerk who'd notarized the transfers. They had motive. They had method. Now they had memory. Eli made copies of the full timeline, organized the story into segments. Before the crash, after the crash, and now. He prepared a press package, formatted it into a PDF, and uploaded it to an encrypted cloud folder. "We need to release this," he said. "But not just yet." Jonah typed, "Wait for proof I can stand. Then speak." They kept training. Jonah pushed harder, started using crutches for balance, stood longer each session, even managed 2 short, shaky steps with Eli's full support. Every new attempt was filmed, time-stamped, and stored. Late one night, as Eli sorted footage, Jonah typed something new. "I remember what Dad said." Eli turned. He said, "You don't know what this land is worth, boy. You think it's soil and memory, but it's leverage. It's power. And if you open your mouth, I swear I'll make sure you can't walk away." Eli froze. "He said that to you?" Jonah blinked once. "He threatened you." Another blink. It wasn't just about the farm. It never had been. The land wasn't just property. It was collateral in something larger. A network of fraudulent deals that went deeper than Eli had imagined. Jonah typed one final message before sleep. He tried to end it that night. Eli sat beside him in the dark, feeling the full weight of what they had uncovered. The story was no longer just about survival. It was about justice. And the reckoning was coming. The week that followed brought a sharp drop in temperature. Kansas wind pushed harder across the empty fields, rattling the old windows and howling through broken seams of the farmhouse. Eli patched what he could with weather stripping and duct tape, but the cold found its way in anyway. It settled into the corners of the house, into the wood, into their bones. But not even the wind could slow Jonah down. His therapy sessions had become more intense, 3 a day, each lasting nearly an hour. Eli adjusted the routines constantly, taking into account Jonah's fatigue levels, the feedback he gave through the eye tracker, and the subtle expressions that now revealed when he was reaching his limit. Despite the toll it took, Jonah never asked for a day off. The small steps had grown longer. He no longer required full-body support to rise from the chair. The crutches became more of a guide than a necessity, and his voice, still raw, still strained, had begun to find form. Simple words became phrases, and phrases occasionally became short, broken sentences. But it wasn't just strength Jonah was building. He was preparing. Every evening, after their sessions, he asked for time on a laptop to type out thoughts. Full memories, exact phrases he remembered from his father's conversations, meetings he had overheard, names he'd been told to forget. Eli watched him carefully, helping organize the information into coherent timelines. The level of detail in Jonah's recollections left little doubt. This wasn't speculation. It was testimony waiting to be heard. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, it happened. The sky was low and thick, the air heavy with moisture. Inside the farmhouse, the fireplace struggled to keep the chill at bay. Eli was drying towels by the hearth when he heard a dull scrape behind him, rubber against wood. He turned just in time to see the walker shifting across the floor. Jonah's hand gripped the edge of the table. His legs trembled, feet planted. He took one slow step forward. "Jonah?" Eli said, standing. Jonah didn't look up. He took another step, then another. Eli moved instinctively, ready to catch him, but Jonah raised one hand. "Wait," he rasped. It was the clearest word he had spoken in weeks. Eli stopped. Jonah took a breath. His back hunched slightly, but his knees held. His eyes locked forward, his arms pushing down against the table to stabilize himself. He released one hand, just for a second, then placed it on the back of the nearest chair, and stood, fully, freely, not for 3 seconds, not for 5. He stood there for nearly 30 seconds before his legs began to shake. Eli moved forward then, slowly, still not quite believing what he was seeing. As he reached Jonah's side, Jonah turned his head, opened his mouth, and forced out a whisper that came from somewhere deep, somewhere untouched for years. "I remember everything." Eli's breath hitched. "Jonah, you're standing." Jonah closed his eyes and nodded. "We're not done." Eli steadied him as they lowered to the chair, hands tight on Jonah's arms, his own heart racing. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Eli asked, "What do you mean, everything?" Jonah looked at the laptop across the room. "Bring it." Eli fetched it, set it on the table, and pulled up the software. Jonah's hands hovered above the keys. They shook, but they moved. Fingers grazed in the surface as he slowly, painstakingly typed one sentence after another. "I heard Dad that night. He was in the garage, on the phone. He said it had to look like an accident. He didn't know I was home early." Eli didn't interrupt. Jonah typed more. "I went back inside. I confronted him. He told me I didn't understand, that the land was already promised, that people were involved who wouldn't let me ruin it." Jonah stopped for a long moment before typing again. He said if I opened my mouth, he'd make sure I couldn't speak again. Eli sat still, barely breathing. Jonah continued. "I left. I got in the truck. I was angry. I didn't know he'd already tampered with it." Another pause. "I remember the brakes. I remember trying to turn. I remember the tree coming fast. And I remember waking up and not being able to move." Jonah stared at the screen. His jaw tightened. "They wanted me gone." Eli looked at him, voice low. "But you're still here." Jonah turned his head just slightly. "Not for long if we stay quiet." That night, they prepared the final statement. Jonah dictated it aloud, slowly, each word coming with effort but clarity. Eli typed it, recorded it, then filmed the final video, Jonah, standing with the walker, speaking directly to the camera. "My name is Jonah Carter. I was in a coma for over 3 years, but I was awake. I remember what happened. I remember what my father did, and I am ready to tell the truth." They saved it to multiple drives, sent it to trusted people, one to the journalist Jonah had selected, another to a law student he had once contacted before the crash. They didn't release it publicly yet, but the time was near. Later that night, as the storm passed and the wind settled, Jonah lay in bed, breathing steady, eyes open. Eli sat beside him. "You did it," he said. "You stood." Jonah's voice came soft but sure. Next, I walk. Eli had always assumed the word family meant safety. It had meant Sunday dinners, firewood stacking in the fall, shared chores, shared laughs, even shared silence. But ever since Jonah whispered, "I remember everything," that word began to fracture in his mind. Safety had been a facade. The house he'd once seen as a refuge had been built on secrets, and now those secrets were starting to crack open for good. The morning after filming Jonah's testimony, Eli received an email from the law student Jonah had trusted years ago. Her name was Erica Benning. She had just passed the bar and had not forgotten the packet Jonah had mailed her in his final weeks of freedom before the crash. She had assumed, like everyone else, that Jonah had died, or at the very least disappeared from public life. But when she saw the video, her response was immediate. "We need to meet," the email read. "There's more to this than you know. I've been tracking these land deals. Your father wasn't working alone." Eli agreed. They set the meeting for the following afternoon in a small legal co-op office on the edge of Wichita. Before he left, he sat with Jonah, showing him the message. "She's the one I sent the file to," Jonah rasped, his voice stronger than the day before. "She believed me before anyone else." Eli packed the external drive with their digital copies, one of the backup videos, and a printed dossier of the evidence they had compiled. Before he stepped out, he looked at his brother. "Do you trust her?" Jonah blinked once. "With my life." The drive to Wichita was long and quiet. Eli couldn't shake the sense that something bigger was still unfolding, something he couldn't quite touch yet. The documents they had uncovered, the threats, the years of silence, it all pointed to something beyond personal betrayal. Jonah hadn't just been hurt. He had been silenced to protect something far more extensive. When he arrived, Erica greeted him at the door. She was younger than he expected, maybe 30, with the kind of energy that came from knowing your work mattered. She wasted no time with small talk. "I've been compiling the names from your files," she said, leading him to a conference room. "Not just your father, but people connected to those shell companies. Do you know how much land passed through Carter Holdings LLC in a 5-year span?" Eli shook his head. "Over 78 parcels," she said, "spread across 5 counties. All flipped to the same private trust in less than 2 months after transfers. That's not mismanagement. That's laundering." She laid out a map covered in red markers. Each one was labeled with a name, a year, a document code. "Your family was the entry point," she continued. "But they weren't the only ones involved. We got signatures from local politicians, forged notarizations, and 2 deals that trace back to a company flagged in a federal investigation 2 years ago." Eli absorbed it all slowly. "You're saying my dad was laundering land for what, the government?" "No," she replied. "For corporate buyers, foreign and domestic, trying to bypass agricultural ownership restrictions. They use people like your father, who already own land under legacy trusts, to funnel parcels through intermediaries. Once transferred, those trusts dissolved, and the property was sold to shell companies with clean paperwork." She paused. Jonah knew. He saw the documents, and he tried to stop it. Eli leaned forward. He said he heard our father say, "If you open your mouth, I'll make sure you can't walk away." Erica nodded grimly, and then he couldn't. She handed him a printed page, a timeline she created, matching key land deals to personal events in the Carter family, birthdays, holidays, Jonah's graduation. "You see this entry?" she said, pointing to one in bold, June 22nd. "This was the night Jonah met me to discuss the documents. That was the last time I saw him. The next day, your father signed over to Westfield and filed an insurance claim on a fictitious structure that never existed." Eli stared at the date. "That's the night of the crash." Erica continued, her voice lower now. "And that's not the end of it. Your mother was listed as a silent partner on 3 of the companies involved. She may have pulled away from the operation, but she knew what was happening." Eli sat back, trying to reconcile the image of his mother, distant but fragile, a woman who cried at Jonah's bedside once and then never returned, with this new information. "She visited the house recently," he said. "She tried to sell the farm." claimed I had no right to it. Erica raised an eyebrow. That makes sense. It's the last parcel they couldn't move through. Your father made the mistake of tying it too tightly to Jonah's name. If Jonah's alive and now, walking and talking, it jeopardizes every deal that came after. Eli's voice dropped. Because he can testify. Erica nodded. Exactly. He returned to the farmhouse late that night, exhausted and quiet. Jonah was awake, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, but when Eli entered the room, he turned his head slowly. "What did she say?" he whispered. Eli pulled up a chair and sat close. "She said you were right, about all of it, and that you were never just in the way. You were the key to the whole thing." Jonah exhaled shakily. I always knew he wasn't just angry. He was scared. Eli opened the laptop and showed Jonah the map Erica had created. Jonah scanned it, his gaze tracing the red dots like scars across the land he had once loved. "They used us," he said, "and they left you behind to bury it," Eli replied. Jonah blinked once. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the sound of wind rattling the storm door. Eli leaned in. "But we're not done yet. Tomorrow we go public. We send the video to the press. We release the documents, and we burn the whole thing down." Jonah looked at him. "No," he said quietly. "Not yet." Eli frowned. "Why?" Jonah's hand rose slowly, pointing toward the window. "They'll come here first." Eli lay awake late into the night, the beams of moonlight slicing through the cracks in the shuttered window and catching motes of dust in the stale air. He watched Jonah sleep and thought about the next move. Their house was vulnerable, their evidence powerful, but they needed allies, strategy, protection. They needed a plan that struck back, and struck hard. At first light, Eli nudged Jonah awake. The transformation in Jonah's face over the past days was unmistakable. His cheeks were fuller, his eyes sharper, the tremor less when he moved. He had crossed from recovery into campaign, and in the dim morning light, Eli felt the weight of their cause settle between them. Using a laptop, Jonah typed a message. "We go public end of week." Eli nodded. It was ambitious, but necessary. They had to gather enough public interest, legal backing, media outlets, and protective measures before launching. If they jumped too early, powerful people would try to silence them. Jonah agreed. They started by contacting Erica again. She had emailed back overnight. She had reporters waiting, local radio, one documentary filmmaker. But she said she had a warning. The names behind the shell companies had begun calling every journalist she reached out to, threatening lawsuits, character assassination, and worse. She suggested they roll out their story in phases. Eli and Jonah spent the next morning drafting a 3-phase release plan. Phase 1. A local news station that covered disaster stories and investigative pieces. Phase 2. Wired platforms and national outlets. Phase 3. Full disclosure with documentary footage and depositions. Every point had buffers, backups, and controlled leaks. They practiced what public statements to make, what to deny, and how to frame the narrative. A story not just of betrayal, but of resilience and justice. Midday, a knock came at the door. Eli paused, heart thundering. He looked to the window, no vehicle parked out front. He released a slow breath and opened the door. A young man stood there, camera slung over his shoulder, press badge clipped his belt. "I'm Jackson Reeves. I'm with the Kansas Tribune, investigative journalist. Erica referred me. She said you'd be expecting me." Eli nodded, stepping aside. He led Jackson in. Jonah was awake, propped in his chair, eyes fixed on the new visitor. Jackson glanced at the camera and nodded. "I saw the video. You're live in 30 minutes. Live radio, then a live feed to web. If I don't air anything else today, I want the first segment to be your voice." He set up his gear as Eli gathered documents to show him. Jackson asked probing questions, recorded snippets, and told him he would upload a teaser by evening. As Jackson began filming an introductory shot, Jonah staring into the camera, faint tremor in his chin, Eli watched his brother lean forward. His shoulders squared. His cheek twitched. And when Jackson said, "Are you ready?" Jonah opened his mouth and whispered the words he'd so long waited to say. "I remember everything. That phrase appeared at the top of Jackson's teaser clip, surrounded by black screen and heavy quiet. And within minutes, it began circulating. Phones buzzed. Texts went out. The teaser hit social media. The farm's address was included. It was their signal flare. By afternoon, their phones rang off the hook. The neighboring towns recognized the name. A distant cousin called, a former classmate. Even a lawyer from the county called to ask for a comment. Some were supportive and worried. Some were skeptical, accusing Jonah of fantasia. Eli fielded them all, directing questions to Jackson and Erica. Later that day, Jackson hurried out as the sun declined. He told them he was going to post a main video and schedule interviews for morning talk shows. He locked down backups of the footage and moved his gear to his car. Before leaving, he said quietly, "You two be careful. Once this goes full, there will be pressure, legal and otherwise. I'll remain your shield on the press side." Eli closed the door after him, then turned to Jonah. "It's happening," he said. Jonah typed, "Watch for her return." Eli's face hardened. His mother had already shown she wouldn't be passive. He set about preparing their defenses again. He rechecked the motion cameras, backed up every digital archive to off-site storage via encrypted cloud services, and printed dozens of copies of every key document. He gave copies to Erica and Jackson. He also prepared a sealed statement for local law enforcement and a trusted attorney in town, demanding that any attempt to interfere with their rights would be met with immediate legal action. That night, the wind rattled the windows, and somewhere beyond the property line, Eli heard a car engine idle. He rose and looked out the window. A dark sedan sat a few hundred yards down the drive, its headlights off, its silhouette poised. He swallowed and reached for the walkie radio he'd repurposed to monitor the camera feeds. On the screen, the backgate sensor triggered and the camera flickered. Jonah blinked once. Intruder! Eli flipped on outdoor floodlights from inside. The lights snapped on in the yard. The sedan's door opened, and a figure in the shadows stepped out. A woman's voice called from the distance, commanding, "Eli, I'm coming in. Let me explain." Eli strode forward, his heart hammering toward the door. But behind him, Jonah whispered, "Wait for noon cops." Eli hesitated, then stepped away from the threshold and flicked on the front door camera. The figure remained in silhouette, then retreated slowly, heading toward the back of the house. The car light switched on abruptly, and the sedan drove off into the dark. Eli bolted to the back door and confirmed the lock. He returned to Jonah's room, where his brother's breathing was shallow but steady. They pulled back, Eli said. Jonah typed, "For now." The next morning the story exploded. The news segment aired. The Kansas Tribune ran it on its homepage with the headline, "Man in Coma Speaks. Exposes family fraud." Clips were shared. Social media lit up. Threads formed. Hashtags emerged. Hashtag Jonah Remembers. Hashtag Carter Truth. The local police precinct issued a statement acknowledging the claims and promising an investigation. The county district attorney's office confirmed it had received the evidence package from Jackson and Erica and had assigned a case number. Across town, Eli's mother anonymously posted a letter to the local news, claiming she abandoned the farm and her life out of grief and confusion, denying any involvement in land fraud or cover-up. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. It was a public defense, a preemptive strike. That night, with media trucks down the road and spotlights trained on their property, Eli sat beside Jonah. He held his brother's hand. "They're reacting," he said. Jonah typed slowly after a moment. "Yes, but they're looming." Eli nodded. Exposing the truth was one thing. Surviving the backlash was another. But they were no longer hiding in shadows. They'd forced their past into the open. Now, they would make sure the story couldn't be extinguished. The media vans left as quickly as they had come. After the first wave of public attention passed, the cameras shifted to the next headline, the next outrage, the next scandal. But the impact remained. The storm Jonah and Eli had unleashed did not vanish. It simply moved underground, taking root in legal departments, auditor offices, and late-night strategy calls among the very people who had once controlled the shadows. The farmhouse changed, too. not just in structure, though Eli had begun making repairs with the help of a few volunteers who had reached out after hearing their story, but in presence. There was life in the air now. The walls, once swollen with silence, now held quiet purpose. Jonah's recovery had not stopped withstanding. Every day since the release of the footage, he pushed further, first short, trembling walks from one room to the next, then across the porch, then one wind-bitten morning, all the way to the edge of the west field. He had insisted on it. Eli walked beside him, carrying the walker in case he stumbled. But Jonah moved on his own, slow and deliberate, with a cane gifted by one of the journalists who had visited. At the edge of the field, Jonah stopped, breathing hard but steady. "This is where it ends," he said. His voice was gravel now, never fully recovered, but it held strength. It held him. Eli looked at him, then across the field to where the horizon met the sky in an endless band of gray and gold. "This is where it begins," Eli said, and he meant it. The lawsuits came next. With the help of Erica and 2 legal aid groups, they filed an official whistleblower petition with the state attorney general's office. Subpoenas followed. Depositions were scheduled. Jonah's testimony, delivered via recorded statement and live appearance on camera, became a central piece of the investigation into not just Carter Holdings LLC, but several interconnected property laundering operations that spanned half the state. Some names on those documents disappeared, resigned, went into hiding, fled. Others were indicted. Their father never came forward. Word came through a contact at the district court that he had withdrawn all known assets and vanished. One rumor placed him in South America. Another said he'd been seen crossing into Mexico. No one confirmed anything, but it didn't matter. His power had ended the moment Jonah stood and spoke. Their mother, surprisingly, returned, not to contest, but to confess. Privately, quietly, she offered a sworn statement admitting she had signed papers without reading them, had been pressured to remain silent, and had left because she was afraid of the truth of her husband, of herself. Jonah agreed to let the statement stand in court in place of charges, on one condition: she never set foot on the property again. She agreed. Months passed. The land was cleared of legal entanglements. Eli was named sole custodian and caretaker, with Jonah's ownership reinstated in full. The farmhouse, once under threat of sale, was protected under a heritage clause triggered by the land's unique trust history. Together, they established a small fund from the restitution money, named it the Jonah Fund, for young adults caring for disabled siblings in rural communities. It wasn't massive, but it was enough to make sure that others wouldn't have to fight alone. The farmhouse porch was rebuilt in the spring. White railing, wide steps, a swing they had salvaged from the barn, and re-stained by hand. It became their place. Every evening, Jonah walked, fully, slowly, carefully, to that porch and sat beside Eli, the two of them wrapped in sweaters in silence, watching the Kansas sky stretch overhead. Jonah's speech was slow, but it came easier. His muscles had adjusted. His balance improved. The cane became more symbolic than necessary. Once, during a television interview, he even stood unassisted for a full 5 minutes while answering questions about his recovery. People called it a miracle. Eli called it justice. One evening, as the sky burned orange and violet behind the tree line, Jonah shifted on the porch swing and looked at his brother. "You saved me," he said. Eli shook his head slowly. "No, we saved each other." They sat like that for a long time, neither needing to say more. Beyond the porch, the wind moved gently across the fields. It no longer sounded like isolation. It sounded like breath, like history finding peace. They had been forgotten. Then they were betrayed. But they had not been broken. Now, they were something else entirely. They were brothers, rebuilt. As the sun dipped low and the farmhouse lights flickered on inside, Eli rose and opened the front door. Jonah followed him in, slow, upright, steady. Behind them, the field swayed in rhythm with the breeze, no longer a place of secrets, but one of truth. And this time, no one was coming to take it from them.